About a month ago, Thorin released a video, Esports Salon Episode 6, that was completely based on the idea of franchising in LCS and essentially how close they were and how owners were, like, meeting the criteria to be able to be a franchise in the League of Legends Championship Series in North America, of course. So the people on this show were Monte Cristo, who is, of course, a very famous commentator, but also a former League of Legends team owner. He used to own Renegades before, of course, um, all of the trouble kind of happened, and he was forced to sell his spot to later Team Envious, were actually the team who bought it from Renegades. But it also featured Noah Winston, who is the current owner of Immortals, and Jack, who is the current owner of Cloud9. Now, in this episode, like I stated before, they essentially just talked about franchising and everything about it, like all the money based stuff, all of the like ideas that they have specifically about it going forward, and there was talks about like if they were going to be able to import more or less players, things like that. Because of course there's a rule right now in League of Legends for importing like a certain amount of Koreans because Korea is of course the dominant League of Legends like location in the world, right? But one of the things they talked about towards the end of the podcast was esports facilities and team houses and what they would look like if these companies were like, if these companies knew that they didn't have a chance to be relegated, right? Because as they explained in the video, they weren't willing to take a chance on, buying a huge $1 million facility or something like that when they could lose pretty much all of the worth of their company if their team had one bad season in League of Legends. So of course, they are now franchising. Since that video came out, it was confirmed that there was franchising and everything, and that we will be entering the franchising era very soon. But what I want to talk about today, as you can see by the topic, is the esports facilities, what they could look like, and the team houses, and kind of how the team house era may be kind of done slash transitioning into this facility era. So in the video, which I'll link down below so you can watch it yourselves to kind of hear it from their own perspectives and the actual perspectives of the owners. But either way, in the video, Monte Cristo said that while he was in Renegades, or while he was the owner of Renegades, he had considered buying an old motel and turning it into an esports facility, right? Where players would get their own room in the motel to do whatever they wish. And then there would be central rooms for the teams to practice and operate. And of course, this would, if you buy a whole motel, it'd be more for every team under the organization of Renegades and how they work. Uh, of course, this didn't end up happening because he was forced to sell his spot and all the things I already explained earlier in the video. Um, but Noah Winston and C9 Jack basically brought ideas of their own to this conversation, saying that they believe that the kind of the future of esports facilities looks very similar to a college campus, which is something, personally as a college student is very exciting to think about. Like I was thinking about it and I almost made a blueprint to kind of like work off of, but essentially you would have like a dorm or like basically apartments essentially is what they would be most likely, where all the players would have like their own room, maybe like their room and a kitchen of some kind, so like almost like studio apartments basically is what I would imagine it is, right? So every person in the org has an 800-foot studio apartment or something, or a 400 by 400 or something like that, which is pretty big. That's like what regular studio apartments are now, right? 800 square feet, of course, for those who may be confused. Um, but essentially, this would create the perfect like living location for the players, but also the ability for them to not only like live with their teammates and play with their teammates and do everything with their teammates and build chemistry, but it also allows them to meet other players in the organization who are playing other esports, which I think is something that's kind of underrated to a degree, right? Like in the thing, or in the video, no, Winston talked about how has his LA or he has his NALCS team, excuse me, in LA, and they're about an hour from his Brazilian Counter Strike team, and they've never seen each other because it's hard to kind of break a practice schedule to go visit other teams and whatnot. But if they're all in the same location and they all work out in the same place and they all eat in the same cafeteria, of course, if they don't eat their own rooms, and they all practice a door down from each other, right? Then you do have that kind of like, it's almost like you couldn't even try to avoid the players if you wanted to, right? You will always see your teammates and other members of the organization around at all times. So, you know, the like current almost meta of esport organizations is team houses, right? Where the players basically just get a house and they all just live in the house and operate. Even some houses where like the N Villa is what they called it, that they had in France for their old CS:GO team. They lived, like in a villa, and even some of them like shared a room and things like that. And then the basement was like there was like a pool table, I believe, and then they had all of their setup where they actually played their matches was in the basement as well. And it was like a really nice house. And I'll link the video to the HyperX tour that they did down below as well, because it's just a good video and it gives you a good idea of kind of what all team houses are like. And actually, HyperX, they have a series on their YouTube channel where they do team house like videos and tours for the teams that they of course sponsor. Um, but they, you know, um, had like a team house and everything like that, and all these teams now are like getting team houses. Like I know Evil Geniuses has a team house, and all kinds of like esports organizations have team house opportunities, as well as actual like boot camp opportunities, which are more temporary. Um, but still certainly viable as far as like living quarters and being able to live like a high lifestyle for someone that would play video games, right? But either way, um, I think it's certainly possible that we start moving away from team houses, because I think one thing that a lot of people aren't willing to give up, like kind of full time, is privacy. And I think there's something about having your own apartment that's separate from everything, more than there is having like your own room in a house, right? So like if you have your own apartment, you can do essentially whatever you want in that apartment. Um, while if you have just your room in a house, it's almost like you get like part of the say of what goes on at all times, but it's not completely up to you. Like if you're trying to sleep at 2 a.m. but all your roommates are playing games or something, um, it's not completely your say to tell everyone to get off and shut down or something like that. But in your own apartment, it's certainly possible to just turn all the lights off in your apartment, and that's it, because there's no one else living there, right? So Team Envious actually are, I believe, to this point, the only team that have an actual facility like that. I mean, they have a actual like part of a building in downtown Charlotte, and all their players live in apartments around the building. I believe it's like a 5 to 10 minute walk, and they live, like I said, they live in apartments, but they actually play and practice and all that stuff in the actual like floors of the building, which are completely customized and catered for the players themselves. And I think it's pretty insane to think about, like that they're at that point where they can do that, because of course Team Envious is in NALCS, and I would assume that they are going to be a part of franchising. I mean, I don't think there's any team officially confirmed, but you can kind of assume who the teams are that will make it, and I would say it's probably most of the teams in NALCS right now are going to end up being in, unless of course they're bought out by bigger organizations that are looking to join. Like I know a lot of basketball organizations are trying trying to join NALCS, and that's something where you'll see like P1. I think has a very high chance of getting bought out because they're a pretty good team, but they don't really brand well. But if you're playing under the title of the LA Lakers, you're going to brand pretty well because the LA Lakers are massive. If you're playing under the brand of the New York Knicks, if you're playing under the brand of the New England Patriots, of the Miami Dolphins, of these teams who we're seeing put in bids for not only NALCS but actually the Overwatch League as well, you're going to see these teams have great branding for their esports jerseys. And of course, we've already seen it with teams like Schalke FC and PSG who have teams in European uh, League of Legends, and then of course FC Copenhagen, who has a share in the ownership of North, and their like logo is like based off of that team and everything. So I think the future of esports facilities and team houses is really interesting, but also just really exciting in general because you're going to see like massive complexes built and designed and made for players to play at the at their peak performance every day, but not only play at their peak performance but like live in almost luxury, right? Because you get food made by a professional cook, you get workouts and things like that from professional trainers. You even, in the case of Astralis, they actually have a sports psychiatrist with them who is helping them, like with pressure situations, and they have like I mean, it's essentially like a guidance counselor, right? So like they have someone who can sit them down and say like, listen, like if there's something going wrong, tell me, and like they can fix that and become better at all times, just mentally, not even in game, just out of game, and in all aspects of life, excuse me, just become better people and better players. And I think that this is something that teams are going to start doing a lot, especially when franchising kicks in. Not just because they should or because they can or because they have the money to and they want to be like the first to do this or first to do that, but because there's actually a competitive disadvantage for the teams that choose not to do this. I think that there are teams in, maybe not in NALCS franchising, but teams who won't necessarily do this, like who may not actually go all out with esports facilities and team houses. And I think that that may like end up hurting them, right? Like I think that there's a chance that these teams and these players and these organizations are gonna like experience significant like decrease in competitive play, and certainly a decrease in exposure and branding, just because of the fact that like people want to watch streams where everything is like a sweet background and like there's really cool effects and stuff, and it's made for actual streaming, and the other players on that competitive team are there, and sometimes you've got them like all huddled around, very similar to how like Optic Gaming, when they first had their house and Nadeshot and Scump were streaming, like you could see Nadeshot and Scump on each other's screens at all time, right? And there's a certain aspect and there's a certain element of seeing everyone kind of interacting and doing things as a team that drives up viewership and drives up interaction with fans, right? So I think overall, we're in for a very exciting time within, I would say by the end of 2018, we're going to be at a point where there's going to be a lot of facilities being built to kind of match the Team Envious facility that we've already seen. And I think there actually might be stuff that ends up being cooler if, people plan right and have good investment with their money, and can really kind of create the futuristic esports facility that everyone is thinking and dreams about.